So when you hear the name William the Conqueror, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Probably the Battle of Hastings, right? 1066. But that one victory, as huge as it was, is just part of the story. The man himself was this brilliant, ruthless, and honestly pretty complicated figure. His ambition didn't just win him a crown, it completely reforged a nation in fire and stone. And this quote from someone who was actually there, writing at the time, just nails the central paradox of William. On the one hand, a pious Christian ruler. On the other, an absolutely merciless warlord. This one sentence sums up the conflict of his entire life. A man of deep faith who was capable of just unimaginable brutality. And it's a contradiction we're going to see play out again and again. So where did this iron will of his even come from? Well, it was forged in a pretty rough childhood, starting right from his birth. See, William was the illegitimate son of Duke Robert of Normandy and a woman named Herleva. Now, this wasn't just some minor social inconvenience. It was a huge stigma that would follow him his whole life, and you could say, really lit a fire under him. And the insult, William the Bastard, went deeper than just his birth. His mother, Herleva's father, was a tanner, a smelly, low-status job, and his enemies never, ever let him forget it. Years later, when the defenders of a town called Alençon hung animal hides from their walls to taunt him, to mock him as the tanner's grandson, William's reaction was pure, cold fury. He captured 32 of them, had their hands and feet chopped off, and then threw the limbs back over the city walls. Yeah, the taunts stopped. After his father died, 7-year-old William became the new duke, and Normandy just fell into chaos. Imagine being a kid, and you're surrounded by constant danger. The men sworn to protect you are just picked off one by one, poisoned, murdered. The most terrifying incident, his guardian Osborne was assassinated in William's own bedroom. Some say his throat was slit while he was physically shielding the young duke. This childhood taught William a brutal lesson. Power isn't just given to you, it's held by force. So, after somehow surviving his youth and crushing all his rivals at home, William started looking across the English Channel. The English throne was the ultimate prize in Europe, but his path to claiming it was, let's just say, tangled and perilous. Okay, so in 1066, you've got two main contenders for the throne. On one side, William insists that his cousin, King Edward, promised him the crown years ago. But on the other side, you have Harold Godwinson, the most powerful man in England. He claims Edward gave him the kingdom on his deathbed. And to make it official, Harold was elected by the Witan, the English council. So you've got a recipe for a massive conflict that was both political and deeply personal. But here's the kicker. This is what gave William his ultimate justification. A couple of years earlier, Harold was in Normandy, and William made him swear an oath to support his claim to the throne. Now the really clever part? William had him swear on holy relics, some of which were hidden from view. So when Harold took the crown for himself, William could paint him not just as a rival, but as a perjurer, a man who had damned his own soul by breaking a sacred oath. This was a total masterstroke. It let William frame his invasion as a holy war, and he even got a banner from the Pope to prove it. So William's got his army, he's got the Pope's blessing, he's ready to go. But then, fate, or maybe just the weather, steps in. For weeks, the wind was blowing the wrong way, keeping his entire invasion fleet stuck in Normandy. At the same time, King Harold had to force march his army 200 miles north to fight off a huge Viking invasion, leaving the entire southern coast of England wide open. Just 3 days after Harold won that massive battle in the north, the winds finally changed. William lands his army at Pevensey, and as he steps onto the beach, he stumbles and falls flat on his face. You can just imagine the collective gasp, a terrible omen. But, thinking incredibly fast, he grabs 2 handfuls of sand, pushes himself up, and shouts this line to his worried men. In a single moment, he turns a potential disaster into a prophecy of his own victory. Just brilliant. Now, the two armies that faced each other at Hastings couldn't have been more different. Harold had the best defensive position on a hill. His elite troops, the housecarls, formed this legendary, unbreakable shield wall with massive, terrifying axes. William, on the other hand, had a modern, combined arms force. He had archers, he had infantry, and he had his game changer, heavily armored knights on horseback. It was the classic standoff, an unstoppable force versus an immovable object. And for hours, the battle was just a brutal, grinding stalemate. William threw everything he had at the English line. Volley after volley of arrows just bounced off the shields. The Norman knights charged up the hill again and again and again, only to be smashed back by that incredible wall of axes. The English position just seemed unbreakable. And then, the moment it all could have fallen apart for the Normans, a rumor starts spreading like wildfire through the ranks. William is dead. His army starts to panic, to break, and the battle is right on the verge of being lost. In that critical moment, William yanks off his helmet, rides through his terrified troops so they could all see his face, and just roars this defiant cry. It was an incredible act of leadership that completely swung the momentum of the battle. But rallying his men wasn't enough. He still had to crack that shield wall. And this is where his tactical genius really shines. He noticed that some of the less disciplined English soldiers had broken formation to chase his retreating troops. So he turned that into a deliberate tactic. He ordered his knights to pretend to flee, baiting the English off their hill. Then they'd wheel around and cut them to pieces in the open. After hours of this, wearing them down, he ordered his archers to fire high so the arrows rained down on their heads. Finally, with the English line exhausted and weakened, King Harold was killed and their resistance just collapsed. But here's the thing. Winning the Battle of Hastings was one thing. Actually conquering England? That was something else entirely. That victory on the battlefield was just the start of a long, violent, and utterly brutal process of subjugating an entire country. When the north of England rose up in rebellion, William's response was terrifying. This wasn't a battle, it was a calculated campaign of annihilation. His armies marched through the countryside in the middle of winter, and they systematically destroyed everything. They burned villages, they broke tools, they killed livestock. The goal was simple: create a famine so awful that the North could never, ever rise against him again. And the estimated death toll is just staggering. 100,000 people, men, women, children, all starved to death because of this deliberate policy. Even his own supporters, chroniclers who otherwise praised him, were horrified by it. This was the ultimate expression of that stern, beyond all measure part of his character. But William's rule wasn't just about pure violence. He was also a brilliant and, frankly, terrifying administrator. He built these huge stone castles, like the White Tower in London, not just for defense, but as these constant, intimidating symbols of Norman power. And then there was the Doomsday Book. This was an unbelievable survey of every bit of land and wealth in his new kingdom. The English called it that because they felt its judgment on who owned what was as final and inescapable as God's on Judgment Day. It was a tool of total control. So, what was the long-term impact of all this? I mean, the Norman Conquest didn't just change who was king, it fundamentally altered everything about England, its government, its architecture, its culture, and even the words you and I speak every single day. And here is one of the coolest and clearest examples of his legacy. It's something we still live with. The conquest basically created a linguistic divide. The Anglo-Saxon peasants who are out in the fields raising the animals, they use the Old English words cow, pig, sheep. But the Norman French-speaking lords who were eating the meat at their tables, they used their words, beef, pork, mutton. The very language we speak today is a direct echo of William's conquest. You know, for a man who controlled so much in his life, William's death was just a complete and utter farce. He got a fatal internal injury from his own saddle while attacking a town. The second he died, his servants stole everything valuable and just left his body on the floor. Then, his funeral gets interrupted by a guy shouting that William had stolen the very land the church was built on. And the final indignity? His bloated body was too big for the stone coffin, and when the priest tried to shove it in, it burst. Yeah, it filled the whole church with a horrific smell. But on his deathbed, suffering for weeks, William apparently looked back on his life with a kind of dread. He confessed his sins, acknowledging the immense violence of his reign. It seems he knew that his actions, especially that harrying of the North, had a terrible cost that he would have to answer for one day. And that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? Was he the great architect who built the foundations of modern England with his laws and castles, or was he a brutal tyrant whose power was built on slaughter and fear? His legacy is written in both the soaring stone of his cathedrals and the blood-soaked soil of the North. And the answer, maybe, is that you just can't have one without the other.